So we get a couple of different camera views as we see Dragon approach. So again, this is that robotic workstation that the crew is going to be using. There you can see the robotic arm, the Canadarm2 coming into view. That's in its ready position. And then Luca Parmitano is going to be able to actually reach out and grapple Dragon with that once it moves about 20 meters closer. We'll be able to get some views from the actual end of the arm itself, also known as the lee. It's the latching end effector. It's essentially the hand of the robotic arm and has the actual capture point and then a series of snares that will draw in the spacecraft. And here's that view right here. You're looking right down the barrel of the end of the robotic arm. And again, you can see that capture point, that small gray circle right in the center of the capsule portion of the spacecraft. Again, the Dragon is really split up into two different halves. You have the capsule, which is the pressurized section that will actually be attached to the station and has all of the pressurized cargo on board, including a little over 1 ton of science experiments and hardware being delivered to the station. And then you have the trunk section, which has those large solar arrays splitting out to the side with a wingspan of about 54 feet. Inside the trunk, you have some unpressurized cargo. In this Dragon in particular, there are 2 items. There's a replacement battery, a lithium-ion battery, that'll be bound for the outside of the station as part of some of the ongoing upgrades. We're swapping out older nickel hydrogen batteries for these new lithium ions. The large payload that's actually in that trunk, though, is a hyperspectral imager suite known as HISUI, and that built by the Japanese government. It'll be used to look at the Earth's surface, actually every material on the Earth's surface, things like rock, soil, vegetation, snow and ice, and even man-made objects have a very unique reflectance spectrum. And so HISUI is actually able to do ground or space-based observations, and this observation can be used for things like resource exploration and mining, and also applications in agriculture, forestry, all across different environmental areas, also looking at urban sprawl, things of that nature. And the station flying over about 90% of the populated areas as it flies around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour. So really a unique platform, just about 250 miles up for getting views back down on planet Earth. For right now, though, if you're just tuning in, we are still holding at 30 meters away from station. We are still well ahead of the timeline. Originally, we were expecting a capture at about 4:30 a.m. Central Time, but we are ahead. We're at that 30-meter hold point. The next milestone, once it gets the go to depart, will be to arrive at just about 10 meters away, and that'll be the capture point, and that'll be over to the crew to actually reach out with that robotic arm and capture Dragon out of the sky. So stand by, getting treated to some really great views this morning as Dragon just camping out the station and Dragon about 255 statute miles in altitude right now. They're actually just about to swing up over the continent of Africa, about to fly over Nigeria, Chad, Libya, swing over the Mediterranean Sea and out over Turkey and then through Central Asia. Again, Dragon continuing to hold just 30 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, right now the teams both at SpaceX Mission Control out at Hawthorne and here in Houston doing some final checks, both on the Dragon spacecraft. The arm itself is the robotic arm is getting moved into what's known as the high hover position, so that's just where it'll hover just above the capture point, which will be about 10 meters away once Dragon gets a little bit closer to the station. Again, on board the Expedition 61 crew, Luca Parmitano, the commander, an Italian astronaut from the European Space Agency, is going to be in control of the arm this morning. We'll be able to hear Drew Morgan, who, if we get a look at the crew here, all the way on the left there, NASA astronaut Drew Morgan, you'll hear his voice quite a bit this morning as he's standing by at the robotics workstation along with Parmitano, relaying commands, or relaying voice commands back down to the ground here in Houston. Six-person crew on board right now, made up of 3 NASA astronauts, 2 Russian cosmonauts, and Luca Parmitano, that Italian astronaut. Also on board, NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Christina Cook, and 2 Russian cosmonauts on board right now, Alexander Skvortsov and Oleg Skoropochka. And keep your eyes on the ground behind Dragon. The station already moving out over the center of the continent of Africa, about to make a pass over the Sahara Desert. So should be getting some pretty dynamic colors in the background there. As Dragon actually moves into a position of eclipse between the sun, with the station in between it and the sun. We should have some good daylight though. Sunset not expected for about another 20 minutes from now. Again, the station's moving at about 17,500 miles an hour. And we are still just holding at 30 meters away. Again, we are pretty far ahead of the timeline. We were expecting to capture at about 4:30 a.m. Central Time, so a little over an hour from now. But Dragon moving through all of the different hold points pretty smoothly this morning, getting about 30 to 40 minutes ahead of its timeline. There's a number of capture windows that get identified by the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston in conjunction with the Dragon control team. And so they have multiple attempts during one of these approaches to actually capture Dragon. They build in those multiple attempts just in case you have any issue with Dragon itself or the robotic arm. You'll have multiple opportunities to actually get the vehicle in. And we're actually looking at potentially capturing Dragon during one of the early windows. The team's usually having to take into account lighting and a number of other factors. We are looking for a capture as early as about 3:50 or so we might be only about 30 minutes away from this Dragon capture, which again, you'll see the robotic arm move out once Dragon's only about 10 meters away from the station, and it'll move in very slowly. It'll actually latch onto that capture point, and then a series of snares will draw Dragon in, and we'll wait for a confirmation here in Houston that capture is confirmed. And for the crew on board the International Space Station, this will be the major part of their task for the day. The actual capture, once the Dragon spacecraft is captured, they hand over control of the robotic arm back down to teams here on the ground. The robo here in Houston working with flight controllers in Canada to actually maneuver the Canadarm2, eventually swing it up and attach Dragon to the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module, also known as Node 2.
Copy, Scott. That's in work now.
And we'll be showing you that a little bit later today after we get Dragon captured. And per the timeline right now, the crew is expected to potentially open up Dragon's hatch today. Stationed in Dragon 256 statute miles over planet Earth. You're watching them pass over Libya, about to cross over the border into Egypt. Eventually they're going to continue swinging to the northeast, moving out over the Mediterranean Sea. Dragon still holding at 30 meters. And we are just entering a short period of signal loss with the station, at least on the KU. That's the high band antenna that is used to actually get video back from the International Space Station. We are expecting to get that back at 37 minutes after, so in just about 10 minutes from now. For now, the Dragon's still holding at 30 meters away. The next go is going to move Dragon all the way into the capture point, which will be just about 10 meters away. And then it'll be over to Luca Parmitano to reach out with the robotic arm and actually capture the Dragon spacecraft. Those that follow along, it is expected and planned to occasionally have these video dropouts. The space station using a space-based network to actually get its communication with us down here on the ground. Actually uses something called the NASA Space Communications and Navigation, or SCAN, to get all of the data, voice, and video from the station back down to us here on planet Earth. There are 10 spacecraft in the constellation of satellites that enable that data actually get sent around using what's known as Tracking and Data Relay Satellites, or TDRS satellites. And that's been used since the early 1970s, and is actually managed by NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, providing that communication not only to the International Space Station, but also far-flung missions way beyond low Earth orbit, like Mars Curiosity rover, and also the Voyager spacecraft actually traveling outside of our solar system. For now, though, the team here in Mission Control Houston still watching over the space station. Everything continuing to go smoothly so far with this approach. The Dragon spacecraft packed with about 5,700 pounds of cargo, currently sitting just 30 meters away from the International Space Station. And we are still ahead of our timeline. We were expecting capture about an hour from now, but could be much closer, only 20 or 30 minutes away from capture. Once it's installed and the hatch is opened, it kicks off a very busy couple of weeks for the space station crew. These Dragon spacecraft, unique in the sense that it's one of the only large sample return capabilities that we have right now. Dragon actually able to withstand the heat of re-entry and splash down in the ocean. It's expected to bring about 3,600 pounds of cargo back down with it, eventually splashing down in the Pacific. As it does have that sample return, a lot of investigations that fly on these Dragon missions will have a pretty hard timeline to them, so they'll get Dragon attached, open up the hatch, and then immediately kick off about 4 weeks of science. And a lot of those science experiments will have clocks attached, so they have to be finished just when it's time for Dragon to come home. Across the 5,700 pounds packed into Dragon for this mission, the lion's share coming up is science investigations. A little over 1 ton's worth packed inside Dragon. It's going to be arriving. As it is a cargo flight, there's a lot of other stuff on board. So you have things like crew supplies, 564 pounds worth. That's typically things like food, clothing, and other perishable items for the crew themselves. As you can see, science investigations tipping the scales over 1 ton. There's some spacewalking equipment on board, usually some spares for the spacewalking astronauts, things like gloves and other items like that. Some vehicle hardware, or usually some large spares. There are things like heat exchanger replacements. There are filtration beds, just a lot of the hardware that actually keeps the station running, coming up about 675 pounds worth. And then computer resources, things like laptops, cords, things like that for the onboard network. There's also about a ton of unpressurized payloads that's split across 2 different items, and that's a lithium-ion battery replacing one that was experienced some damage when we had an issue with a battery charge discharge unit, or a BCDU, a little bit earlier this year. Those lithium-ion batteries being delivered normally 6 at a time up on the Japanese HTV vehicle, so 1 coming up in Dragon's trunk, and then that large hyperspectral imager known as Hisui also packed away. But again, total cargo arriving in Dragon, 5,769 pounds. A lot of that going to get unloaded by the space station crew over the next several weeks. A lot of that science going to get executed on board and packed back in. Dragon's scheduled to come home with about 3,600 pounds of cargo when it splashes down in January.
Houston Station on 2. The crew's ready for a Dragon approach through capture point.
Copy that. Stand by. In Station Houston, Dragon is ready to proceed to the capture point. Expect approach to resume shortly.
That's Scott.
And just there, we heard Drew Morgan reporting the crew ready for Dragon to depart 30 meters and head to the capture point. The teams down here on the ground conferred they were also go, and then Scott Skady, our Capcom for today, just radioed up that they're going to see Dragon depart that 30 meters momentarily. So it's going to depart 30 meters and begin flying in nice and slow to what's known as the capture point. It'll get there and it'll hold once more, one final time, and it'll be about 10 meters away from the International Space Station. And then it's time for the crew to jump into action with that robotic arm to reach out and capture Dragon.
Station Houston on 2. Dragon has begun approach from 30 meters. Monitor per step 5 in 1.102.
Copy, Scott. Step 5.
And so just there, you heard a Dragon now continuing to approach, the crew being told to monitor. They have a number of different parameters for Dragon on their robotic workstation that they're looking at as it approaches. Again, the crew does have a control panel on board, able to send commands to the uncrewed cargo vehicles should the need arise. Now the Dragon approaching from the 30-meter point. It's going to continue to close in until the capture point now, which will be about 10 meters away from the International Space Station. And one other thing of note, it has been a particularly busy fall for the crew on board the International Space Station. This weekend obviously not going to be any different. Dragon arriving this morning with 5,700 pounds of cargo. And then just less than 24 hours later, tomorrow, a Russian Progress spacecraft set to arrive, the Russian Progress 74. And if you haven't had enough early morning space station, be sure to tune in tomorrow on Monday. Coverage going to begin at 3:45 a.m. Central, 4:45 a.m. Eastern, for the automated docking scheduled at 4:38 Central, 5:38 Eastern. So the busy season continuing for the International Space Station throughout this week. We just wrapped a series of spacewalks over the last month. 2 cargo vehicles arriving in 2 days today, and then a lot of science for the crew on board. And then we're all looking forward to one final flight to the station this year with Boeing's OFT flight, that orbital flight test, the first flight of the Boeing Starliner, right now targeted to lift off on December 20th. So it's going to be a busy closeout to 2019 for the space station. But as a lot of the mission managers, flight directors, and others will say, business is good when we're busy, and we're definitely busy right now. But Dragon already inside of 30 meters. Right now it's about 27 meters away and continuing to close in. Should be getting that video back momentarily. Right now the Dragon and station have already passed well over Asia. They actually just crossed the border between Kazakhstan and Russia, and they're about to swing out over northern Mongolia. And pretty soon we're going to be seeing the station enter an orbital nighttime. The sun should be coming down in about 9 minutes or so. So we'll see things start to darken, Dragon slipping into night, but the crew is still able to monitor the vehicle on its approach using lights on station and on the robotic arm to watch Dragon as it comes in. But we are less than 30 meters away, continuing to close. Get that video back for you momentarily. Right now we're about 26 meters and 26 and a half meters and closing. So live views of Dragon back now. You can see the orange hues starting to mount as the sun sets on station and Dragon. So they're about to pass into an orbital nighttime. And right now they're about 262 statute miles over planet Earth, about to swing out over northern Mongolia and northeastern China, and eventually swinging out over the Sea of Japan and right over Japan itself. 24 meters in closing. Again, Dragon's going to continue to approach until about 10 meters, and then it'll be at the capture point. It'll stop, and then it'll be time for the crew to reach out with that robotic arm and capture Dragon out of the sky. So things still going smoothly. We are still a little bit ahead of schedule. Again, we were originally targeting a capture time of about 4:30 a.m. Central Time this morning. We'll keep an ear out for what they tell the crew, but we are expecting to be about 20 to 30 minutes ahead of that capture time. And we'll be sure to update you as Dragon continues to check off its various milestones approaching in. Again, right now, about 23.5 meters away. Again, we are looking for it to get to about 10, and then it'll be capture point arrival, and then it'll be time for Luca Parmitano, the Expedition 61 commander, at the controls to reach out with the robotic arm and capture Dragon. This again is a view at that robotics workstation where Parmitano and NASA astronaut Drew Morgan are monitoring Dragon's approach. You're actually looking at their view on the monitor that they're using. You can see the overlays over Dragon, and that's just the expected area where it's supposed to be. So you can see Dragon inside of that green outline, so continuing to approach as expected. Then if you look at the numbers on the right side on the bottom, you can see the range, so 22.35 and decreasing. And then on the right, you can see the actual rate that it's approaching in. So it's coming in at just about 0.2 of a meter per second, or actually even less than that, about 0.02 of a meter per second. So very slow and steady approach as Dragon flies in. About 10 more meters to go, and then we'll be at that capture point. Dragon continuing to close in, just crossed the 20-meter point, so just about 10 more meters to go. And we'll see Dragon once again pause. We'll hear some communication between the station and the ground here as they move through the final steps. It'll be time for the Expedition 61 crew to reach out with that robotic arm and capture Dragon. And Dragon just about to cross 15 meters away from the station. And we're just about 5 more meters to go, and it'll be at that capture point. And you can actually make out some city lights on the Earth below. Dragon and the space station just making a pass over Japan. They're about to swing out over the Pacific Ocean, though, as they are in this orbital nighttime. Dragon right now about 13 meters away from the station. And from this view right on the latching end effector of the robotic arm, you can see Dragon just how close it is. It's coming up on 11 meters away. You can see the capture point on the spacecraft. It's that gray circle pretty much right in the center of your screen. Once Dragon arrives at the capture point, Expedition 61 Commander Luca Parmentano is going to start driving the robotic arm in to actually grapple that Dragon spacecraft. It'll make its initial contact. Then a series of snares will engage to pull the spacecraft into the grasp of the robotic arm. Then we'll stand by and wait for a call of capture confirmed. And standing by, we should be hearing the capture point. Arrival has started, and that means Dragon will once again hold.
Station Houston on 2. We're ready for you to confirm capture point hold per step 6 in 1.102.
Copy that, Scott, in work.
And there it was, Dragon arriving at the capture point. It's just under 11 meters away from the station right now. And so now that we're at the capture point, the crew's going to check the positioning of Dragon and the health status of the arm. Then eventually the crew will be given the go for capture from Mission Control Houston. It'll be over to them to actually maneuver the arm in and capture Dragon. So again, standing by right now at the capture point. Dragon just 11 meters away from the International Space Station. Now we're just going to stand by until the crew gets that go for capture.
Houston Station on 2. Capture conditions are confirmed. The crew's ready for Dragon capture.
Copy that, Drew. Stand by for capture. And as a reminder to the crew, we're now entering the no exercise constraint.
Okay, Scott, we copy. We're in a no exercise constraint starting now.
So you just heard Drew Morgan radio down the crew's ready for capture. Now the team here in Mission Control Houston will confer, along with the Dragon flight controllers out at Hawthorne. You heard him say there is an exercise constraint, so they don't want the crew exercising, as that can actually impart some vibrations or some loads to the station itself as they're on something like the treadmill or anything. So when you're moving the arm and you're doing these very delicate procedures, you don't want anything impacting that.
Go for capture sequence. Perform step 4 in 1.110 Dragon capture. Begin monitoring the back away cue card.
Hey, Scott, we copy. We have a go for capture sequence 1.110 step 4 in work.
And so right there, the crew getting the go for capture. The capture sequence takes about 8 minutes or so from the go, so pretty soon we'll see the arm start to move. Again, Expedition 61 Commander Luca Parmitano is the one at the prime controls for this morning's operation. The crew has a number of procedures. They also have some cue cards just in case they do need to send any commands to Dragon for it to back away for any reason. But Dragon arriving at this capture point well ahead of schedule. Originally, we're expecting it to get here in about 20 minutes or so from now, so continuing to be ahead of the timeline. We were expecting to capture at 4:30 a.m. Central Time, but now, if everything continues to go as it has so far this morning, we should be getting that capture a little bit sooner. And once we see the arm in motion, it won't be long before it actually gets to Dragon. And this is a view from right at the end of the robotic arm. A camera on top of what's known as the lead, the latching end effector. It's essentially the hand. There's one on either side of the 57-foot long robotic arm. It's going to be honing in right on that capture point, that silver circle right in the center of Dragon, in the center of your screen. It'll move in and get some initial contact, and then a series of snares will actually engage and pull Dragon firmly into the grasp of the robotic arm, and then we'll get a call of capture confirmed. And we're still standing by. You'll see that arm start to move in the next couple of minutes. Dragon continuing to just fly in formation with the station just about 11 meters away. And you can see the arm starting to be in motion, coming alive there. In Expedition 61, Commander Luca Parmitano, the Italian astronaut, is at the controls as the prime for today's capture operation. And now the Canadarm2 closing in on Dragon. So the arm going to slowly inch its way closer towards Dragon again. It's headed for that capture point, that silver circle right in the center of your screen. The latching end effector, the Lee, going to contact it and then use a set of snares to actually pull Dragon in. But the crew currently driving forward. Next up, Dragon capture. And right now the arm just about 3 meters away from Dragon. Alignment looking good on the arm, inside of 2.5 meters away. Dragon right now is in free drift, so just inhibiting those thrusters so none of them are firing as the arm makes contact and capture. Again, we'll see that initial contact and then the set of snares will engage, and we'll stand by to hear a capture confirmed call. And the arm just 1 meter away. Alignment good. And we see that initial contact. Trigger has been commanded, the snares retracting. So again, a set of snares retracting in to get a good capture on Dragon. And right now we're just standing by for confirmation of capture. And we just heard the call here in Mission Control Houston. The snares have retracted and capture is complete. So that call coming at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern.
Capture complete. Go for post-capture reconfiguration. And I would like to congratulate all of the people in Houston and around the world who contributed to the launch, navigation, and capture of Dragon. They must know that whenever we welcome a new vehicle on board, we take on board also a little bit of the soul of everybody that contributed to the project. So welcome on board.
Copy that, Luca. Great capture, guys. Nice job.
And getting some congratulatory words from Luca Parmitano, the Italian astronaut and the Expedition 61 commander. He was primed for the capture this morning. Again, capture being confirmed at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern Time, while the station and Dragon were flying just about 262 statute miles over the South Pacific. So again, at this point, Dragon is being captured. Control of the robotic arm is going to get handed off to the teams back down here on the ground, and they're eventually going to swing Dragon around and get it lined up and attached to the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module, also known as Node 2. That'll take a little while. We're going to check in real quick just to see just how quickly that's going to happen, as today's capture did take place about 25 minutes ahead of schedule. So things moving pretty quickly. We'll see how quickly we can get Dragon actually attached and bolted to the International Space Station so the crew can start unloading a big chunk of the about 5,700 pounds of cargo, both internal and external, being brought up on this SpaceX Dragon resupply mission. Now, though, continuing to get some great views. Dragon now in the grasp of Canadarm2. Again, that capture coming at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern. Dragon and the International Space Station flying about 262 statute miles over the southern Pacific. And this is Mission Control Houston, still getting a view here of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft in the grasp of the Canadarm2 robotic arm. Again, Dragon arrived ahead of schedule this morning, and the crew was able to grapple it at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern, while the station was flying just about 262 miles over the South Pacific.
With you on 2, Luca.
Scott, can you give us a very a quick view of what the constraints are going to be right now for exercise, how they shift?
Copy, stand by. And back with you, Luca. So right now we are in the no T2 exercise block, and we're expecting all of those exercise constraints to shift to the left about 25 minutes or so. If you'd like, once we come out of those blocks, we can give you a heads up.
The most important one for us is the second one, the no exercise that was at 1300. If you could give us a countdown to that one, 10 minutes, 5 minutes to the no exercise in the middle of the day.
Absolutely. We'll give you a heads up when we're nearing that and when we're going to be exiting the blocks as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
And while we have you, we have a heads up for Jessica, if she has a moment.
For Jessica, she's here.
Okay, and no rush on this, but we want to let her know that she is go to pick up with that WHC manual fill anytime that she would like.
Okay, copy that, Scott.
All right, thanks.
And so just there you hear Scott Skady, the Capcom down here in Mission Control Houston, talking with the crew. There are some exercise constraints that get put in place anytime we're doing capture operations. As right now they're in what they said no T2, so T2 is the treadmill. And all of these exercise devices have some vibration isolation built in, but just to make sure that the crew isn't imparting any loads that could actually affect the maneuvering of the robotic arm, they put some constraints in place so the crew's not running on the treadmill while the robotics controllers down here on Earth are actually maneuvering the arm to get Dragon over to that Node 2 port. So that maneuver is going to take about 2.5 hours or so from now, and they're going to start slowly twisting the arm and moving Dragon over to the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module before they get it put in place. Then it'll eventually get attached and locked in by 16 bolts that'll firmly attach it to the common berthing mechanism. We're going to go ahead and break away for a little while that takes place, and we'll be back in just about 2 hours to show you the final coverage of the installation. So we'll be back on the air at 6:30 a.m. Central Time, 7:30 a.m. Eastern for this installation of Dragon to the space station. One last time, though, the capture was done ahead of schedule this morning. Capture coming at 4:05 a.m. Central Time, 5:05 a.m. Eastern, with Dragon and the station just about 262 statute miles over planet Earth. But with that, one major milestone down, Dragon captured. Next one coming up is going to be Dragon installation. So stick around in just a couple hours and we'll be bringing you that as Dragon gets ready to get attached to the Harmony module. And then the crew can get the hatch open today and start a very busy couple of weeks of unloading cargo and executing a lot of science before Dragon comes home in January. So we'll be back in about 2 hours, so tune back in then. For now, though, we will go ahead and sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.